from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
We are most pleased to welcome you to a two-week series on art, and we have really the artist in residence at North Idaho College, and he's a member of our faculty, and he is one of the gifted artists in this country. A lot of his work is in sculpture work, and in this two-week series we're going to talk to him about his philosophy and his techniques, and in the second week we're going to show you in great detail his greatest and most recent work that's receiving recognition across Idaho and the Northwest. In fact, I would suggest it's the greatest artwork I have seen in the state of Idaho. I welcome to the program Joe Jonas, as I indicated, a member of our faculty. Our guest holds a BA degree in art, a BA in education, and an MA in art and education from Eastern Washington State University. Our guest was born in Marseille, France, and has a great European flavor to his life as well as an American flavor. Joe, welcome to the program, and we congratulate you on this breathtaking work that we'll be discussing.
Thank you. And pleasure to be here.
We also recognize all the other work you've done, and I'm very pleased as always to have two panel members, our regular panelists. First of all is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney and also the law clerk to Judge Gary Heyman in North Idaho. And next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And I want to pause to say to Steve, and who's also the Executive Director of the North Idaho College Foundation, that they were very instrumental in this extraordinary work that we're going to talk about. We have 5 panels that you'll be seeing in the second show of the history as illustrated in art by Joe Jonas from before humankind all the way through into the future. And Steve Schenck and the Foundation's Board of Directors were instrumental in the financing of the work that Joe did along with North Idaho College, and he had a sabbatical in which that happened. Steve, you people are to be very proud of this great work. Not only is it a great artwork, but it's worth a tremendous amount and even financial value that is owned by the college. With that, I'll ask Janelle Burke to commence the questioning.
Well, to set the stage for our viewers, I think it would be helpful for them to know something about your background. Where did you receive your training, and how did you become interested in art? Were you always interested in it?
I was always interested in art as far back as I can remember. I kind of have to go back to Marseille when I was a child. My surroundings, the environment in which I lived was very old. It dated for centuries back, Middle Ages and early on. Keep in mind that Marseille is the oldest city of France. It's over 2,000 years old and back before 600 BC, as a matter of fact. So lots of artifacts, and I live amongst these things, and for some reason from a family of 10 children, I was the one that always stopped somewhere to look at the details of things, and I was fascinated with statues and murals and so on of the things that were around me.
What was the earliest time when you began to receive formal training in your art?
Formal training maybe indirectly in schools, naturally. Again, if I go back to Marseille, my younger days, in those days we didn't have Xerox machines, we didn't have copiers and so on, and the instructor had to draw on the board. Since I was always drawing in class anyway, doing drawing out of turn, that is, instead of doing something else I was drawing, he would put me on the blackboard to draw for the class, to do things. I have no idea of what my drawings look like in those early days, but they must have been okay, I guess. I don't know, I have no idea. But as far as formal training, naturally my regular schooling here, high school and college and so on.
And then as an artist, you just keep learning all the time.
You just keep learning.
You practice and you learn, and right. you look at other art.
Right, and looking is very important, looking at other art and living with it. I don't know, I just always have enjoyed doing a drawing on paper and seeing how you could resolve a likeness of what you were drawing. For example, trees and a landscape or a horse or whatever it may have been. Figures. I did a lot of war pictures, drawing war pictures in those days, and they were, the other kids were delighted to see these things. They were always over my shoulder watching me draw. That was part of it. But basically the training is just living life.
Steve Sheen.
Joe, tell us a little bit about how you came to the United States and decided to pursue art as a career here.
There was no reason for coming here. My sister had moved out here, and she kind of paved the way for the rest of the family to come. In our family were 10 children, mom and dad, and it took 10 years for all of us to come here. At the time, we came at different times, intervals. But for some reason, at times, I feel like I've been cheated out of things because there are so many other things that I like besides just doing sculpture, painting, and so on. I like other things. I like the sciences. I like many things. For some reason, I was always taken and pulled for the art. So I never really made a decision as to I'm going to be an artist. Way back, I remember with my friend we talked, and he was going to be an instructor, and I always said I was going to be an artist. I didn't even know what that meant, but I knew I wanted to do pictures.
Let me take that tug and pull question one step further and apply it to what you do professionally. You teach, and you are also a professional artist. Is that a conflict for you at times, or do those two professions work well together for you?
They work real well for the particular, at the state that I am in at this particular time. Yes, it works well. The teaching gives me a chance to see what other people do and probably expound on some of the things that I know, hope to help students, and then I get a chance to do some of my work. But let me also say that the truth about this is that, yes, there's always a conflict. Obviously, I would like to do sculpture 24 hours a day.
And you did for a while when you were working on the major project we're going to talk about later.
Right.
I know that's a concern for
Yes.
you. Is it difficult to budget your time between the demands of teaching and your students and that voice inside you that says, Joe, I need to be working on this?
Yes, and Joe ends up in the studio at from 10 o'clock to maybe 3 in the morning many times. That's where my budgeting comes from, out of my hide.
I'm going to, I guess, steal one of Janelle's questions. She made the mistake of asking it before we went on the air, and I thought your answer was so wonderful. She was asking you, when should a young person move into art or become involved? And would you repeat the answer you gave us before we went on the air? Well,
I think my answer was that this particular young person will know when her heart will tell them as to whether they should go into art or not. I think it's a feeling more than anything else. There are a lot of people that have made decisions after many years of doing other works. I think it's great. It's fine. But for a young person, if they have that feeling, and let your heart tell you and guide you where to go.
I would like for you to introduce to our viewers who are in 7 different states and parts of Canada something about your work, that those that have not had the privilege yet of viewing it. And as I indicated at the end of this program, we'll unveil what I call your masterpiece, and then next week we'll show all 5 panels. But let's spend a little time talking about the different types of art that you have dealt with. I know there's a lot of choices, and what you have featured, and maybe why that you have routed yourself in that direction.
I have done from graphic design to illustrations to this fine arts work, and it wasn't too many years ago when you had to be a fine artist to go into the graphic design field, because they needed people with the dexterity of doing accurate work, diagrams, whatever it may have been, not only to lay out the work, but also to execute the work. So they needed an artist. Well, things have changed in the last few years, where now the computer is being used, and maybe people with lesser of a dexterity with their hands can actually apply this and go into the graphic field. So yes, I've done the traditional graphic work. I have done some fashion illustration for a few book covers, illustration for just many spot advertisements, and that was kind of the job that I went into. I worked for a private company in Spokane, and then went to Chicago to do more work, and came back this way in the Northwest. I love the Northwest.
Just for a moment, take us through some of the work. Again, not this major piece that we're going to deal with, but the others are major too. But talk to us about some of the work that you've done that is also displayed at North Idaho College permanently. I know on the Christian Gymnasium you have some remarkable pieces, and then on Boswell Hall that we're setting in at this time. Tell us a little bit about how you came up with the design and the kinds of creative processes you had to use to produce those pieces.
Well, again, the process of creating a piece of work, first of all, you have to have a theme. You have to know, and my theme was naturally using figurative work. You also have to know the kind of material that you are going to use, and this particular material will guide you as to how you may proceed in the execution of this. President Schuler at the time had asked me to do something for that because a few other artists had submitted drawings, and for some reason or another, they were not accepted. So when I did this, it was different than what they had expected. Beside baseballs and baseball bats and so on that represented the field of sports, I just thought that instead of focusing in on just the sports, the tools of the sports, I thought again I would focus into the human aspect of the sports, and not necessarily focusing on a sport, but focusing on the growth of the human behavioral system as far as they come here to college, they know something about whatever they are going to do, whether it's sport or other things, and then there's a certain amount of growth that goes through, we hope, after 2 years or more. And that's kind of the abstract thinking that I have to place myself into a particular theme to be able to come up with answers. So that was my theme in a sense. Students, growth, what happens there? And so therefore, how do you show this? Since I don't have a film, it's just there are pictures that images that don't move. How do you get to give this feeling? And I made it in different stages.
And you have
female, male, and female.
And these great figures are up on the building itself.
On the building itself, they're about 10 feet 4 inches tall. The male figure, and they are welded, direct welding. This is not the casting of bronze casting. It's welding.
Mm-hmm. Remarkable
metal
work.
welding.
Janelle Burke.
Along that same line, I want to ask you, how do you get the idea? Does it lay in your mind for a while? Let's say you have the theme already, but you don't know for sure what you want to do with that theme, but you want to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
And so does it lay there until suddenly, in the middle of the night, it strikes you, or do you think about it over a period of time? How do artists generally, and this is not just for those projects, but for maybe paintings and other things too, how do artists generally come up with the idea, the conception of the
Well, I think that deals with looking at things, the thinking process. That's what you have to have first. You're thinking about this particular theme, or thinking about what theme should you use. In this case, we have resolved the theme. Now, what kind of imagery are you going to convey on the final work? That requires doodling on paper. You may have an image in mind, but they are kind of nebulous in your mind. They're not clear, so you quickly do some thumbnail sketches and put them together until from one thing something else evolves. It's a kind of an evolutionary process where you don't see it right away. It just doesn't click in the middle of the night and say, there it is. It's something that evolves. Yes, it does take some time, the thinking process.
Now, I'm a musician, but I know there are lots of similarities between the two forms of art. When you sometimes have an idea, does it sometimes move along faster than other times?
Yes.
Does it sometimes seem like it takes you a long time to get it right? Other times it will come to you rather quickly.
Oh yes, sometimes it does hit in the middle of the night, or any time. All of a sudden there is the answer. You know, you've been thinking about it, and maybe you lay it to the side, and all of a sudden it comes.
Here's what I can...
This has happened to me on the last panel of this particular project. I had, in my rough sketches, I had submitted ideas there, but it wasn't quite in my mind. I knew something had to be changed, and finally about Christmas time it clicked. So.
Now, just one last question real quickly. Do you feel like you're an artist, or do you feel like you're a sculptor? I know that's kind of a funny question.
Well, I don't know if there's a difference between artist and sculptor. I think I'm a person with lots of images in my mind that, as I see circumstances, I put it into images, and I can put it in a sculptural form, three-dimensional form, or two-dimensional, depending upon the need. I think you can transpose from one language to another, and you can do the same.
Joe, I'm going to change direction a little bit. You and I have had a number of discussions about artwork and about the things that you'd like to do and the things that the college would certainly like to be able to see you do. And these projects are not easy to put together. What's the greatest frustration for you as an artist?
Well, I think naturally is you have an idea, and you want to express this idea, as in this project. The budget, maybe money. We're talking about.
So they're always that's always a limiting factor, or generally a limiting factor.
Generally a limiting factor.
Well, and that leads into another question that I wanted to ask too. How difficult is it to make a living today as an artist, exclusively as an artist, doing nothing else, not teaching, not working at some other job on the side, but just doing the art that you want to do and hoping that someone comes along and pays you for it?
Well, it isn't easy. You know, the starving artist idea is almost true, but in our days there are lots of ways to make a full-time living as an artist, as I said, going into the graphics art, but doing fine arts exclusively can take a while. If you prepare to keep the belt cinched for a while, I think one can do it. It all depends on the area that you're in. Lots of factors enter into this particular problem, and the solution is that yes, if you feel like you want to do this and nothing else, then one should pursue it. But it's not easy. It's not easy.
Is there someone whose work you particularly admire?
Lots of them. Numerous people that I like, but some of the better knowns naturally is Michelangelo and Rodin are probably, and many others, but the two that I look, my mentors. And
we keep getting back to sculpture, and we're going to talk more about that certainly as the show progresses, this show and the next show. But I've been around you enough to know that your talents are not confined just to that. I've seen your sketches and I've seen some of your paintings. Do you move pretty freely back and forth between those media? Very
freely. It also becomes, well, it's like speaking two languages. When you know both languages well enough, you can go into one and the other and not even know that you're doing it. And that's kind of what happens after you overcome the obstacles of the mechanics of things and how to do this or that and so on, then you've worked freely. You can see it in many mediums. I can see projects in many mediums, instantaneously.
I've had the privilege with this panel over many years now to interview artists and also individuals from the humanities, and both those who paint and sculpture and those who write. There's always a question that I'm very, very interested in, and we don't always get the same answer. And that is, I ask artists, as you do these great works, what is your relationship to the general public that's viewing it? Are you very concerned if they get your full message, or are you fulfilling what you believe that you should do? And I would just very much like to know what Joe feels about how the public responds to his artwork.
Well, what an excellent question. I think, I guess my personality, or whatever it is, my childhood or whatever, I seem to want to please the public sometimes more than myself. And there may be times when I may be angry about this, but I am concerned with the general public, because I feel this way. I don't just do a work of art just for myself, because basically all artists do work to show to others, and therefore if you can convey this particular idea, this particular emotion, this particular experience, if you can convey it to the general public, why not also design within this for the general public so that it can be understood possibly, and so on, and appreciated.
I so appreciate your answer, because I recall from your answer that an artist we had some years ago who was also involved with a lot of sculpture, and he said at times that he was also commissioned to do work in which he really wrestled with this whole process, and even sometimes he became angry that he wasn't able to express certain things, but he also felt he had this obligation. So
Right.
It does vary.
That's
One of the things that I want to do, and it's because we're getting fairly close to the end of the show, and I want to do this to build a bridge for next week, and then we may have a little time left, and Janelle will continue the questioning. But for those viewers who have been with us from the beginning of the show today, or if you've just tuned in, our guest is Joe Jonas, and he is our artist in residence at North Idaho College, and he's done remarkable work. On the first show, it was our purpose to talk with him about his philosophy of art and how that's evolved over the years, and I'm sure you agree with me that he has great articulation and also great compassion and passion for the field of art. But what we're going to do on program number 2 is to share with our viewers in Canada and the United States his latest work that is housed at the North Idaho College Library in the lobby as you enter. We invite all of our guests to come and view this, again, I'm going to repeat, masterpiece. There are 5 panels that deal with the history of our region, and we're going to take a break right here to allow our staff to show you the unveiling that took place in May of 1994, and Governor Cecil Andrus came to our campus, and on commencement day he had the privilege of unveiling Joe Jonas's work, and I'll ask our staff if they will do this at the time, and then we'll come back to finish our questioning today with our guest. Well, Joe, we just did the unveiling of your works of the 5 panels, and again, I want to repeat that that is in the lobby of the library at North Idaho College, and as I've told our viewers, we're going to take them through each panel next week in great detail, and our staff's done a beautiful job of doing those close-ups, and that's something for next week. Again, we really congratulate you for this really wonderful work, and we have time for a couple more questions. We'll ask Janelle Burke to continue the questioning.
My question has to do with, as a teacher, what you tell students. Do you encourage every student to express their art as best they can? Or do you say to some students, you have no talent? Sometimes you hear people say, I don't have any talent, I can't draw. Does that mean you can't enjoy art?
No, as a matter of fact, I think you can enjoy art at any level of ability. Art is not just for the artist to enjoy, it's for anyone to enjoy. And to answer your question, I don't recall in my many years of teaching that I've ever told. I never have. And I've never told that one does not, you don't have a talent, you may as well quit and do something else. No, I don't think it's for me. I don't think it's for a teacher to make this particular judgment. I think that, you know, the person may not have it at this particular time in class, but who knows what may transpire in the future years. We never know, so we don't know. No, I never do. I'm always encouraging.
Good.
We're just running out of time, but I would just add a footnote that's with great wisdom that you say that, because I understand that Albert Einstein was told by a teacher once that he didn't have certain talents in his own field. So I think that's a great lesson and a great message for any faculty member in trying to judge the future of a student. I have been given the signal that we're right now out of time, and on behalf of our panel and our staff, Joe Jonas, you've been very generous with your time. We're very grateful, and we have great news for our viewers that you will return next week. And on that program, we will walk our viewers through the 5 panels of your latest artwork. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this program as much as we have, and I invite you to be with us again next week at the same time when we will continue part 2 with Joe Jonas, the artist, and particularly look at his historical message and art of this region. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station. From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to part 2 of our 2-week series with Joe Jonas, who I describe as the artist in residence at North Idaho College. For those viewers who were not with us last week, we had a wonderful time discussing art in general with our guest, who is really renowned in his field. He is not only a teacher in the field of art, but he is a great artist and has done works in many different areas. And we shared with you near the end of that program that today we would be taking you through his latest work, which is housed at North Idaho College Library in the lobby as you go in. It is a 5-panel production and work dealing with the history of this region prior to humankind settling here and all the way through the different periods and into the future. Joe Jonas, it's a pleasure having you back, and I know our viewers are going to enjoy what we're about to do.
Thank you.
And as always, I'm so pleased to have our 2 regular panelists, Janelle Burke, who is an attorney and the law clerk for Judge Gary Heyman in North Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and he's also the executive director of the North Idaho College Foundation. And I mention that because it was his foundation and the board of directors that were so generous financially to our artists to permit this great work to take place. And Joe was on the sabbatical, and the college and the foundation together made this effort possible for Joe. Joe, what we're going to do is a little bit different format. Normally, the panel asks questions before I do, but our staff has prepared some video. We're just so happy to be able to take our viewers through your works. At this time, we're going to ask the staff to put up panel number 1, and you may want to just briefly tell us about the fact of what the 5 panels are all about, and then we'll start with panel 1. Go right ahead. Yes.
Yeah.
Here's panel 1, and maybe we'll just go through them, and when we get through, we'll
Sure.
go back to bring them all together.
Panel 1 is a representation of before man was here, and also it's a combination. I also thought of the Indians that were here, the people that were here, and the animals that gave them they enable them to survive with the various animals that I'm showing there. You'll note that I don't have, I'm not depicting the predators. I'm showing the animals that were from this particular area, and also, as I said, the animals that help for the survival of the people that were here.
It was their lifeline, wasn't it, for those days and prior to modern development. I also noted from this that in your design from one to another one, here is a really great close-up of a portion, but it's done in a more rough texture, isn't it?
Right. I wanted to get the movement here. Again, coming up with something like this is complex. You finally end up with what you have, but I had many thoughts on this. The geese that are flying overhead. I wanted to get a moment in time here where the animals, all of a sudden, again, I make this up in my mind so that I can come up with these images. Stop the moment in time of these animals, the geese flying overhead, and so on. Maybe they heard voices, human voices coming in, and so on. Who knows? I make up these stories in my mind.
In this panel, it's pre-human, and then also you're moving into the humans
To the
being
human,
here, and the relationship with the animals.
right?
At that
The
time.
relationship. Yes.
Right.
For example, the fish going up the creek there below. I'm showing the buffalo, which was really not native of this particular area. But then again, when the Indians, as we will see, when the Indians from here acquire the horse, then they were able to move to the plains to finally get to this.
We're going to move on to the next panel, so we get through all 5 and then have some time for questions. Here now we are in panel 2.
Panel 2 depicts, and I wanted to kind of give the total panel, devote the total panel to the Indians. Reading about them has really touched my heart, and they were quite the survivors in this particular area. Naturally, the life was harsh, and it wasn't like the coastal Indians where they had an abundance of food. Here they had to really go seek for the food, and the ritual dances, as you see here on the screen, were important for them. Again, here the arrow maker looking at how straight the arrow is so that he can go on a future hunt and so on. And in this particular panel, I'm depicting the total, quite a few hundred years, if you might say. And here, around the 1640s or so, when the acquisition of the horse made them mobile, so that they were able to move to the plains and go and hunt for the larger buffalo, the larger animals, so that they could secure more meat and the skins and so on. So that's the depiction of the panels. Here the ritual dancers, and I'm symbolizing the whole Indian nation in a sense with the peace pipe showing peace, with the whites, with whatever,
With
everything,
with the time,
nature,
the
time,
history.
and the passage of time. So there's quite a bit of passage. And I'm depicting also the woman as the great provider of raising the family, feeding the family, and so on. Lots of work. The woman was marvelous. So I wanted to depict her in the splendor of womanhood with her children. I just was very emotional about it.
You can see it in your work. And now we'll move to panel 3, which is another stage in the history of the Northwest.
Panel 3 is when the white man came into this particular area. The gold panner, naturally, having the ecstasy, you're showing the agony and ecstasy of hard work and discovering this, just throwing the head up and say, I discovered it, it's there. And Fort Sherman, the military making their post here in Fort Sherman, which I discovered a lot in this particular one. Showing the cavalry, naturally, I had help on this to make sure that everything was exactly as it should be. The fur traders began to trade with the Indians for furs and other things, and the Indians get other goods from the whites. Naturally, in this particular panel, the woman in the background there with her hand to her mouth is really kind of skeptic about what is happening. The train, the marvelous train that came into being, the Iron Horse, brought more people, and that changed the landscape. That changed the way of life for the Indians and for the white settlers. The Cataldo mission, I thought that would be a nice point to give to this particular panel, the conversion of Christianity, possibly, and naturally the lake, the famous Coeur d'Alene Lake, and its steamboats, showing the Tubbs Hill there, the point, which is a landmark, at least for me it is. So I tried to depict that. So all in all, you have a brief
Again, a lot of history in that panel.
A lot of history.
Now we're at number
years.
4, I believe.
Number 4 was the time when Coeur d'Alene finally was making a statement that this is not just a town that is going to die. We're going to be here for good. So some of the main buildings were taken away and replaced by permanent buildings, brick buildings, stone buildings, and so on. So I'm depicting these. The new people coming into town, the family. I'm trying to show the family. It was because of the family together that held things. The first school, the logging, the mining, the farming were the primary industries in this particular area. The mining, which again is depicted here around the turn of the century with a particular drill. In the background, you will also note that there's the horse and buggy kind of fading away. It's going behind the new people, and out behind the new family, you have the Model T and so on. The buildings that I'm depicting, again, shows permanence.
Yes.
So that's
certainly, again, we're talking about a long period of time, and because all that development takes some time. And then after you have done all this, hundreds and hundreds of years in these panels, well, one could say even beyond that, you were very creative, I think, in having panel 5, because you didn't stop with now, you're looking towards the future. So take us into the future with panel 5.
Well, panel 5 is the one that took me a while. We do have recreation, and we do have the We are still going to have the industries here that deals with forestry and deals with mining. So I'm depicting this, but I didn't want to depict it as the actual miner at work and the forester or the logger cutting trees. I'm showing, I'm depicting the recreational area that this is becoming to be. So showing young people, again, the simple task of just playing on the beach. And then education, naturally. This college is a big part of the educational knowledge for people here. And I'm depicting also about 100 years of from the automobile, the combustion engine, to the computer, and the thinker in the sense, looking back and thinking ahead, and the two young children looking ahead to the future, with an expression of maybe not quite knowing what is going to happen, but yet cheerful.
I think our viewers who were here last week could maybe more understand my comment that I think I just don't know of any artwork in the state of Idaho that is so breathtaking and such a masterpiece. And we congratulate you and we thank you for sharing that and having it for future generations. And with that, Janelle Burke will continue the questioning.
I'm going to get into some of the how did you do it parts of this project. Were you given a type of thing that you had to work with? In other words, a medium that you had to work with. Could it have been a painting?
It could
And
have
you
been a
decided to do
painting, it
this?
could have been anything. But as I talked to Steve and we talked about this, I thought, well, let's make it real permanent. Let's go the best. And that's what we did. And they agreed, so I was delighted.
And so then you started the idea, it's going to be some kind of a sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
And then did you do drawings first?
Yes, I did quite a few drawings for
Sketches.
the idea, sketches, very rough. And when I came to the idea that I thought they would look at and probably accept, I brought them over, and they were elated with it, I think they were at the time, and
So
it worked out that way.
Although it was...
But from the drawings, I'm sorry to cut you off here, but from the drawings, then I had to transpose this into three-dimensional work. So I did small, very small panels, 1/8 size, that would depict these particular two-dimensional images into three-dimensional concepts, so that they could see it as to what it would be like.
So you did sort of a dress rehearsal.
Dress rehearsals, boy, and did I do it. And some of them I wouldn't even discuss, because I did this and started over and did this and it was, yes, it's
But then eventually...
fun to do.
Yes. And eventually you had to get to the actual process, and I know Steve asked some questions about that.
Well, one of the things I'd like for you to do first, Joe, that those viewers who saw last week's show got, I think, some perspective as to the scope of that project, because they saw the unveiling and they saw people. As I watched on the monitor, as you described each of these panels, we may have lost a little of that, and there may be people who are thinking that these are small bronzes. Give them an idea of the size of this piece of artwork.
I had, there are 36 by 56 inches.
So almost, each one almost 3 feet high by 5 feet wide.
Right, by 5 feet wide, and we had a space of 14 feet to cover, so I did cover that 14 feet altogether. I was thinking, in my thinking, is those panels, and they are separate, yet in my thought they had to have come up with a whole concept. So I'm looking at the whole before the parts. Here we're looking at the parts, but you have a whole, which was over 14 feet.
Now, the other thing I'd like for you to comment on for a moment, if you would, please, is certainly one of the things that struck me as these started to take shape in their final form, panel by panel by panel, was the degree of relief. I mean, we originally talked about a bronze relief. To me, that was pretty much two-dimensional artwork with a little bit of elevation, something that was raised slightly from a flat surface. I was amazed at how much relief. Talk about some of the actual
projection.
Yes, how far out some of those pieces project from the wall.
Well, some of those pieces project some up to 12 inches of the main background. And yes, again, we were thinking of maybe a lower relief, but as I proceeded with the work, I thought, well, why not give the full benefit of some of these things being in the round and yet keeping them, some of them in low relief, so you have the total gamut of relief work from very low relief to high relief.
In fact, as you go from panel to panel, the bull elk at the top, the gold miner, the gentleman who pans for gold in panel 3, the cavalry officers, those are almost three-dimensional. I mean, parts of them are three-dimensional, but they come out from the more two-dimensional aspects of the work. Was it difficult to blend those?
No, it wasn't difficult. It just was fun to work with because you're talking about in and out movements within a picture. If they were all coming out at the same time, then it would not be as exciting as seeing some lower relief and high relief. So yes, I did play in the compositional aspect of things. They are designed according to what would be best in the composition.
Oh, I get so excited about this, I won't give Janelle a chance to ask another question. I'm going to go right back to her in a second, but first I have to make one comment, and that is that I am just so delighted to see Tony choose to do this show, just to give you the credit that I think you deserve, and I couldn't agree with you more. I have yet to see a work of art like that any better anywhere in the world.
Well, I think that's very nice of you to say that.
Absolutely sincere.
Thank you.
Janelle Burke.
Well, then let's talk a little bit more, and I concur. It's just totally enjoyable, totally enjoyable. But let's talk a little bit then about the next process that you did. Once you had decided what you were going to do, then you go to the foundry, or how do you actually get the material you're going to use? Do you order it and then you begin to apply it? You make the molds?
You're talking about proceeding with the actual size work.
The physical part.
Well, I guess naturally I had to order some panels, boards, and styrofoam and clay and so on, and the clay I got from the foundry. Building suppliers have the board that I needed and so on, and proceeded to do this in clay. And then from the clay, is this what?
Yes.
From the clay, and after the clay was done, then we took the panels and transported them to the foundry in Joseph, Oregon.
And that's where you went, down to the foundry in Joseph.
In Joseph, Oregon.
I
Valley
know
Bronze, very good foundry.
a lot of people around this area are probably familiar with work that has been done there. And so then you took everything down there.
And then I would stay there maybe 2 to 3 days, and I have stayed up to 4 days there. But then work on the panel, doing my last-minute touches, and then they would proceed with the mold making. The clay can't stay there permanently, so you have to transform this clay into metal. And to do this, a lot of people think that they just pour bronze on it or whatever it is. It's not like a chocolate dip strawberries or something, but you have to work with, you have to make molds. And the complexity of the molds is according to what you have there. Any undercuts, for example, full arm, full figures, these have to be cut and molded separately and cast separately. So once this is done with dozens of pieces, then a wax cast is made off the mold. And so once I got that part and worked with some of this, then they would proceed with that. I'd come back and work on the next panel.
So now when you're working on the panel and you see the lines, is that something you do, that's part of the mold process and not something that you do after it is in place?
Now, again, I'm not sure that I understand this.
Well, probably because I don't know what I'm very much about the process. But when I see all the many varieties of, there are fine lines, and that is all part of the molding process. It's not something you do post-molding, the lines or the specifics. In
other words, you didn't cast that in bronze and then come back with a chisel or a drill or
I see what you mean, the lines, you mean the textural effects and so on?
Yes.
Oh, no, this is done on the clay.
And
this is captured by the mold. The mold is really a liquid. It's kind of a creamy substance that hardens to a flexible, rubbery substance. So it is brushed on. Every little nicks and crannies are filled with this mold. And layer after layer until you get a thickness of maybe 1/8 of an inch or more. And then a mother mold is made over that, because this particular, the first mold is quite floppy. It's very flexible. So to keep it in its original place, a mother mold is made, and this is placed within that. And then wax is poured into the mold, and layers of it are placed until it is the desired thickness, the thickness of what the metal will be. So in about 1/8 of an inch or so. And that mold is taken off, and then you have a wax, and you continue working on the wax process.
Now, I know that Steve knows even more about this process than I do, which is not, I know very little, but Steve knows perhaps
Enough
some
to be
other
dangerous.
questions.
Well, tell them about that. It is called lost wax bronze casting. You might as well take the last step, Joe, and talk about how you go from the wax now to the bronze.
So here we have the wax pieces, and they're in several pieces. And these are covered with another mold-making material that hardens in the firing, called the ceramic shell method. And once this is done, and it's a long process again, because you have to have several layers. They have to dry it at the proper temperatures, and then another layer is put on, and so on. So it is a long process. But after all of each individual pieces is done that way, then they are fired in a kiln. And as they are fired in a kiln, the wax melts out, and that's why they call it the lost wax. The wax is lost and recuperated. What you have now is an empty shell, in a sense, but whatever that was wax is now replaced by an empty cavity. And this particular mold, for the last step, you melt the metal and you pour it into that particular mold that is hardened. You pour it in there and hope that everything turned out right.
And of course, the point to make here is that this is a process that Joe went through 5 times. With each panel, he would go down, come back, apply the patina. We talked about perspective in terms of size. Give this project some perspective in terms of time. And I know you didn't keep track of your time.
I didn't keep track of my time
because
it would have been too discouraging.
Oh, my goodness.
But I worked, when I was on sabbatical for 1.5 years, I worked all day and would take time for my family, eat dinner and so on, and then by 8 to 10 o'clock I was back in the studio till about 4 in the morning, and then would sleep for a few hours and continue the process on a daily basis. So I did work 7 days a week. And most of the time, and it was the first 1.5 years it was done day and night, and then the second 1.5 years I couldn't complete it all. Second 1.5 years I did it at night, mostly on weekends.
Earlier I said I was surprised at the relief, and that's my other great surprise, I guess, was the amount of detail. I think Joe called them maquettes. The little small mock-ups that he did originally.
To size, to proportion.
Just to give us an idea of what he intended to do. And we thought that was roughly what we were going to see, only larger. Well, the detail that came out of the process was incredible. And there were times that I was seriously concerned about his health because he was staying up too late.
I was. My family was concerned, but when the work has to be done, and you need to just proceed and do whatever needs to be done to complete it. It takes time. You're not satisfied with one thing, and pretty soon you do something else. And there are other considerations where I had an armature underneath, and maybe that didn't hold on good enough, and it come down on me, so I'd have to rebuild it. But most of the time it held up, so it takes time to build the armatures for these things also, so that they hold up and they don't fall down in the process of working and also transporting.
Give it a grade, Joe. You're a teacher. We've all graded it as an A+. To the artist, what now that you can step back and look at the finished product?
Oh, wow. Gee, I'll be easy on myself. I'll give myself a C. No, I think, I don't know, but I think this is something that I don't have. I think that I've put out a good piece there, and I think it will be enjoyed for a long time, I hope. And it's a significant, what's significant to me is that this was the first time that it was done for this particular area. We have some sort of a historical imagery, maybe a poetic way of expressing the passages of time.
I'm going to have to interrupt, but I would say it's also appropriately housed, because in the Learning Center of the library is where you would look at history, look at the past, present, and the future.
And that's what brought this to mind also. I said, what would better depict the library than to do something that is historical?
On that wonderful note, we'll have to bring this program to conclusion. Joe Jonas, on behalf of the panel and staff, we thank you and congratulate you for this amazing work and all your other work that you've done in the field of art. Ladies and gentlemen, I just am sure that you've enjoyed these two programs as much as we have. We just had a great time, and we'd like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time, and we'll discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.